Identity politics really work. Politics is about power, and how do you get power? By using identity that's playing on the insecurity of the people.
Much of recent kinds of extreme forms of nationalism cannot be simply explained by colonial legacy alone. There is a combination of both domestic and international factors.
We don't have a quote-unquote common enemy anymore, so we turn on each other. So definitely it's about narrative on who are the others, who is the enemy now, who's gaining more, who's losing more.
The Chinese were white until the white man called them yellow. So the verse of the usage of the yellow is actually also the imposing power. So they're otherizing us. That they are not the white, so that's why we can colonize like them.
If you want to develop that country to become a modern nation, you have to find an agreement. No, you cannot have majority rules. You have to find something wise.
Hello and welcome to Center Stage. Joining us on Center Stage in this episode is Dr. Saiza Shukri, who is an associate professor at the International Islamic University of Malaysia. She's also an advisor for the All-Party Parliamentary Group in the Malaysian Parliament on racial and religious harmony. We also have Professor A.K. Ramakrishnan, an Indian scholar of international relations and West Asian studies, whose work examines Orientalism, postcolonialism, human rights, globalization, and the changing international order. Thank you very much for joining us. We also have from Japan Dr. Qayyum Naoki Yamamoto, who is a Japanese scholar of Ottoman Sufism, traditional Japanese culture, and whose work explores the relationship between Islamic civilization and East Asian cultural traditions. We have with us also renowned psychologists and activists from Indonesia, Alisa Wahid, who is the daughter of a former president in Indonesia, and whose work also focuses a lot on pluralism, identity politics, and post-colonialism as well. And last but not least, we have Ilham Habibi, another former president, or coming from the family of a post-Suharto presidency, and who focuses on the technological advancements as well as economic development of Indonesia. Thank you very much for joining us today. The way in which we'll have this discussion maybe is going to be free-flowing. However, I will start with a question for each one of our guests today as we try to unpack what is a very let's say, timely topic in terms of the world that we live in, one that is governed a lot by rhetoric, narrative, that shapes a lot of the policies that impact us all across the world today. Dr. Saiza Shukri, maybe if I can start with yourself. Malaysia has often been presented as a positive example of multiculturalism, where there are different both ethnic minorities as well as religious minorities in Malaysia. However, we have seen actually in the past couple of years a rise in populist language. We've seen a rise in racism actually within Malaysia. Is the Malaysian model at threat right now?
It's a very good question. Is it at threat right now? If you ask me, it is, because our relationship between the majority Malays, so those are the majority, and we have Chinese and Indian minorities, I would say it has always been fragile in a sense, because our relationship, if I bring it back to we're talking about, colonialism, the British divided us, the Malays, the Chinese, the Indian, according to our economic roles in society. And that has spilled even after we gained independence in 1957. For so long, we've kind of had stability because of our political system, our political structure, whereby we had one coalition which had all of the parties representing the different ethnic groups. But that broke up in 2018 when we had the first change in government. So that is what you were mentioning when you said that we've seen rising populist rhetoric, because after the fall of that coalition we call Barisan Nasional, which ruled for 61 years, all of those with a little bit of radical ideas started to come out of the wood and started to talk about claiming Malay special rights, especially. So that's the populist rhetoric we're seeing in Malaysia, the rise of Islamist populists that brings together the Malay identity with our special rights, our Islamic special rights based in our constitution. So that is why I said it's been fragile in the past now 8 years now, because with the rise of this Islamist populist rhetoric, then we're seeing the minorities are feeling threatened. But the thing is, the Malays also claim that they are being threatened. So as a model, maybe we need to think of a new model because the old model is no longer working because of the shift in political system.
Professor Ramakrishnan, I want to maybe look at it from a different perspective, maybe the flip side of what Malaysia is going through, as we heard from Dr. Shukri here, which is there is also a huge rise in India of a populist rhetoric, in fact, policies that have actually targeted the Muslim minority in India. And often it has manifested itself in a far more violent way than we have seen in Malaysia. Do you think that the identity politics that have played out in India are also a remnants of what colonialism left in India in terms of dividing people and actual geography, not just simply society, based on religion and ethnicity? Or is this something that, you know, we can't blame on colonialism, and it is something that actually is homegrown, let's say?
Both of those elements, the remnants of colonialism and the newly emerging right-wing tendencies across the world, but India has been an important anchor point for that right-wing politics. It emerged out of a long-standing imagination of the other. It is a product of a civilizational logic being applied in modern Westphalian nation-state terms. So nationalism is an important part of that. India had a different kind of nationalism, anti-colonial nationalist movement. Majority of that tendency was inclusive in character, but it has become exclusionary to such extent that the state now represents that kind of extreme form of nation-state politics.
Let me just touch on a point here for you both before we continue. Is it, because obviously a lot of this is about narrative, is it true to assume that when both countries like India and Malaysia were under colonial rule, ultimately occupied by foreign powers, it was easier for different backgrounds of Indian or Malaysian people to unite in their opposition to foreign powers occupying them? And one of the approaches that these foreign powers would do in order to maintain their hegemony and control was to divide the people based on their ethnicities, and that those people unfortunately were unaware, and to this day maybe, that they have more in common in their homeland than they do differences. Does that make sense?
Sure. So definitely, like in the Malaysian case, in our fight for independence, the only way for us to get independence was for the different ethnic groups, so the different parties representing different ethnic groups need to work together. So in that sense, yes, we see that there is the sense of community or of nationhood in the beginning, but now 60 plus years later, that is unraveling because we don't have a quote-unquote common enemy anymore. So we turn on each other. So definitely it's about narrative on who are the others, who is the enemy now, who's gaining more, who's losing more. So that is where we are right now, where we lack a common thread that brings us together as a society.
Internally within the country, you have new positioning of different communities. The othering process becomes the lifeblood of the kind of nationalism that becomes prominent. Much of recent kinds of extreme forms of nationalism cannot be simply explained by colonial legacy alone. These are part of the new kind of politics that is emerging across the globe, but with specific tendencies within India. What happens is that the new enemy that she was talking about, that is internally defined, but global Islamophobic context gives enough impetus for that kind of rhetoric to become aspects of policy and conduct of political parties and so on and so forth. So there is a combination of both domestic and international factors contributing to the assertion of the far right in India.
Let me move on to Dr. Qayyum. Japan maybe is a bit unique in that it's often referred to with the lens that Japanese identity and culture has maintained its own identity regardless of foreign influence, let's say, or presence in the region. And you, from your perspective, you look at things through geographic, rather than just through geopolitics, but you're a lot more concerned with the intellectual history and memory, the movement of ideas that has happened. From Japan's perspective, or from where you're sitting, how do you view this identity issue, or the question of kind of maintaining indigenous identity whilst accepting influences that come from abroad?
Yes, so Japan is considered as one of the interesting country or the region, while sometimes the Japan was regarded as the part of so-called global north. But the other context in Japan is also the part of the Asia, or Japan is something called the Far East. But before thinking about Japan, I think the most important thing is that when we use the word like East and the West, we must not forget the imposing the power behind the uses of those words. Means that this West and the East can be often translated by the like us means like West, and them, or like we and the others, or like the center and the marginal. And also when we talk about the colonialism, for example, like in the first day of this conference, like many people were mentioning about the European colonialism, and also the abstract of the session. It says that those Asian societies were still they are deeply shaped by so-called the European colonialism and empire. But I'm sure the neighboring countries they still remember that Japan is also the colonial empire too. But maybe you're just too kind, so you didn't mention it. But this is also like historical fact. The Japan is also the colonial empire. That it means that when you understand like Asia, that you must not forget that it's not but the one. They are the West who colonized those lands, and we are just like colonized. That there are some like a country who, in the process of the modernization, for example, Japan is a good example. They also internalized the vocabulary of the colonialism. They internalize this like colonizing mindset, not only by the colonized mindset, and also and also when you think about the East and the West, for example, I was a graduate from the university in Japan, and my area is called Middle Eastern Studies. So I study I study about Islam, but also I study area studies, and I took the Middle Eastern Studies. But Middle East of Japan is Pacific Ocean. But I'm not studying about the fish. I'm studying about the intellectual history and the Islamic civilization. But why Japan is used the word like Middle East, or why we Japan use the Far East? I'm not from Far East. I'm from Japan, and also, and this is not about East and West, but also the color of the skin is also the same. Like in Europe, they used to go like white and the black, and also like brown, and also the yellow. And do you know in history, like we Japanese or the Asian, like Southeast Asia, or the Japanese or Chinese, are called like yellow people. But look at my color of skin. Like, do I look like Pikachu? Like, is my color of skin like yellow? These are studies that the Chinese were white until the white man called them yellow. So the birth of the usage of the yellow is actually also the imposing power to the otherizing us. That they are not the white, so that's why we can like colonize like them. So, but when you back to Japan, I think it's quite unfortunate that we Japanese like intellectuals, the Japanese like academicians, like we are doing our best, but we still don't know how we can locate ourselves in like Asia, because our like intellectual infrastructures or our educational systems or the vocabulary that we use are still deeply influenced by the Western usage of like Asia. So I think right now the most important thing is how can we remember this like a power structure like behind those vocabularies.
I will come back to terminologies because I think language is very important. Language is not simply a means of communication, but it reflects both ideology and identity, but also power often. And I will come back to that, but I want to move on to Dr. Elisa Waheed, and I have a bit more of a kind of, let's say, a human question here to bring it down as a family psychologist. When we're talking and we're looking particularly today at the kind of increased polarization that happens in the world, when we look at the rhetoric that comes out, whether it's in the UK from the far right, people like Nigel Farage, or some of the things that are said in US politics around Trump and his movement, or even in other places in India and so forth, how much of the extremism and the kind of identity politics that are pushed out there to otherize others and to blame people and so forth, how much of that is actually based on ideological conviction and how much of it is actually based on personal insecurities, that these are just troubled people who don't have an actual sense of belonging? You know, one of the interesting things that we've been looking at over the past couple of weeks, in the US, they're looking at this birthright law, changing it, right? And there was an ironic situation whereby during the World Cup, the top scorer of the US national team, who Trump intervened to get him to play again, right, is actually a birthright citizen. The same day he intervened to get him to play was also the same day that he was challenging in the courts this idea to strip them of it. So the idea that actually when you look a bit deeper into it, a lot of the identity politics, the negative ones that are being pushed out, aren't pushed out by conviction. There's no ideological logic to it because they're doing the opposites of it. So is this troubled, usually men in politics and in power, kind of projecting their insecurities, or is this an actual ideological view that has been conjured up and is a political ideology?
I would say both, because every system is determined by the actors of the system, right? So there's a research in U.S. presidential election, Indonesian presidential election, and Indian presidential election during 2010 somethings. A research done by Sherian George, and he said what he found out was the sentiments against others are always prevalent. But they're always benign until there is a political contest coming into the interplay. Because identity politics really work. Politics is about power, and how do you get power? By using identity. That's the most effective one, playing on the insecurity of the people. So people have this sense of insecurity, especially because of the globalization. Nobody is actually can say that they are pure anymore. No community can say that. Like for example, in Indonesia, probably Indonesia is lucky from the start because Indonesia is an idea. We don't have a race, Indonesian race. We have the Melanesian, the Malays at the western part, but we have also the people from the eastern part of Indonesia, which is more curly, more Pacific kind of people, right? So we use the term Indonesia to unite us within the diversity. So it makes it easier for us to embrace that ideology. We know that we have our own colors, skin colors, and language and tribes, but we are united against on Indonesian concept. But for even after that dynamics, we still have the identity politics coming in. We still have this insecurity. And for me, the way I see in my work as a human rights activist, and also because I serve as in Nahdlatul Ulama, the biggest Muslim organization, it actually is about majoritarianism. It's not about religion.
I'm gonna come back to this. I just want to move on to with Ms. Ilham, and there was an interesting point that the doctor made earlier when we were talking about unifying the different components of society against colonialism. They were unified because they had a common enemy. One of the interesting things when we look at particularly Indonesia and Malaysia was actually post-physical colonialism, because I think ideologically we're still colonized, but let's say post the physical kind of presence of it. One of the success factors that were in Malaysia and Indonesia was they managed to create a positive national program that people could unite behind, right? And often it was an economic one. And in Indonesia's case, particularly, as well as Malaysia, that was the case. And obviously with your father, that was something as well in terms of, aviation industry and other things that were there. It's something that people can unite behind that kind of national project. How much or how important is it for a country to have economic and intellectual and scientific independence in order for it to actually have an identity that people can unite behind, that it's not simply a rhetoric or kind of populist discourse that will move and shift people?
Okay. Well, thank you. I actually wanted to comment on your statement that we are actually not yet beyond colonialism. We have a certain over-dependency on other countries in terms of technological, or even these days I would say data colonialism. It's still a threat to our countries, and not just our countries, but it's actually to most countries in the world, just in the hand of a few. Yeah. So in regards to your question, I think the idea of catching up to a similar level in terms of economics, technology, innovation, science, etc., is not only to unite the people behind it, but everything we have to do as a human being living in a country is to raise the standard of living, the quality of life. Even if you establish an Islamic state, let's say, yeah, the state doesn't mean anything if the state cannot deliver. You need to be in a position to raise quality of life. So if you keep that in mind, what is it that you need to do in order to raise quality of life? Well, education is for sure one thing. Right? Education is probably the best investment any country can do for its people. But education is not enough. You have to provide them a livelihood. They should do something with education. Once you educate them, of course, they're smart in order to research, innovate, create industries, etc. And that is, I think, what we see with all developed countries in the world. This gentleman wrote to me, he mentioned the global north, right? I mean, you look at the northern countries, right? So-called northern countries. That's what they've done, right? They have raised the standard of the people by creating an economy, giving them rights, creating quality institutions, that system needs to deliver. And if it doesn't deliver, then something else happens. Right? And that's what we see in many countries, right? Not only in our countries here, but also even in the countries that are already established countries in the global north. If they don't deliver for the people, we see funny things happening, right? The identity politics that you saw, that you mentioned, everybody else, that is all a consequence of not delivering. There are people that feel left out, and so they do something about it and they come to these ideas.
All right, I'm gonna throw in a question here, and I would like you all to discuss it as you will, please. So don't wait for me to kind of prompt any of you. Because we're looking at reclaiming narratives, we've used certain terminologies in terms of modernization, globalization, identity. Yourself, you've just spoken now about investing in education. There was a time that each of your respective countries and regions were actually leading the world in specific fields, be it in education, be it in ideologies, be it in technology, economics. What has happened? Or maybe let's take the first term of globalization as coming from either Muslim majority countries or countries that have huge Muslim populations. Islam itself introduced the term, I would say, globalization before anybody, right? In that, if you look at the scripture of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about sending Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as, or peace be upon him, as mercy to all of mankind, right? To all the worlds, right? Rahmatan lil alameen, right? Even the world is maybe more globalized than just one globe, right? If you look at another verse of that God has created us into people and tribes so that you can get to know one another. Why is it that globalization is only viewed from the modernist kind of perspective of technology and from that Western-centric idea that looks at the world based on Middle East, Far East, black, yellow, and white? What is stopping you from reclaiming that term of globalization?
Can I start? Yes. So in Indonesia, because we have the biggest population of Muslims in a single country, of course, it takes a lot of humility, open heart, and an open mind, accepting heart, to not set Indonesia as an Islamic state. We are the biggest Muslim population in one country, 230 million Muslims in a single country, but we are not an Islamic state, and we don't have Islam as the state ideology. Why? Because the ulamas in Indonesia, they come up with this idea of Islam rahmatan lil alamin to be upheld by the trilogy of ukhuwah. This is very famous in Indonesia, and it's instilled to the Indonesian Muslims. The first one is ukhuwah Islamiyah. To whoever Muslims from all over the world, we are Muslims. But it is limited by the Maqasid Sharia. So not every act on the name of Islam, like the one done by ISIS, can be claimed under this Islamic, the Ukhuwah Islamiyah. And then the second one is Ukhuwah Wataniyah. And this is in Indonesia, the Muslim communities, whenever we have events.
So just if you allow me, just translate here. So the first principle, the brotherhood within Islam.
Within Islam.
The second, brotherhood within nation.
National this is the Ukhuwah Wataniyah. Mm-hmm. And the third one is Ukhuwah Insaniyah. Mm-hmm. So every person, humanity. Every Muslims in Indonesia believe that, okay, I have these three that I need to uphold together if I want to establish Islam rahmatan lil alamin. So are we always, because this is an Islamic event, not wine and roses, coffee and sugar, is everything going rosy? And no, we have dynamics, of course. For sometimes we have the majoritarianism in Indonesia in terms of Islamic hardliners starting to campaign for formalizing more
But can I
Islamic
just say
values.
those three principles that you say, with all due respect, they're not uniquely Indonesian. They come from Islamic theology. So why are you presenting that as if that is a development or something that is different from what Islam teaches?
Is it instilled as the binding values of the people by the religious leaders that can actually influence the political system?
No, I understand, but because you started your point, you're saying Indonesia is not an Islamic state,
Yes.
even though it is a Muslim majority country.
Yes.
And the reason you're saying, what I understood was that because it prefers to base its identity on these three principles.
Yes.
But those are three principles that are enshrined in Islam anyway. They're principles that the Prophet spoke about.
Yes, exactly. The way we translate Islamic values in
That makes it
Indonesia
an
is
Islamic.
that.
Why is that not an Islamic state then? That's what I don't understand. I mean, those are principles
why?
that are very much enshrined within Islam. They're not contrary to.
Exactly. Because of Ukhuwah Ikhwatonia, the Muslims in Indonesia prefer to have Indonesia, not Islamic Indonesian state.
Yeah, I have an alternative viewpoint.
Oh.
I think the establishment of the so-called Pancasila in Indonesia, whereby the first sila or the first principle is the belief in one God or godness. It's actually not God as God, but it's more generic in my view. Comes from the fact that it's actually post-colonialism. In the colonialism that we had in Indonesia, we had a lot of discrimination, particularly in the educational sector. There were only few people who were allowed to go to higher school or university. The overwhelming majority were kept stupid, for a reason. And so when we freed ourselves from the yoke of colonialism, nobody wanted to suppress anybody else. Everybody had to be equal. That means the spirit of establishing the nation, I mean, as my friend Alyssa said, we are overwhelmingly Muslim, but the Muslims did not want to overpower the non-Muslims. The Javanese, she's Javanese, I'm like partially Javanese, didn't want to overpower the non-Javanese. So no, kind of new colonialism by the majority, no dominance of the majority over the minority. Everybody had to be at the same level. I think in that spirit, we should see the establishment of Indonesia. So that's basically anti-colonialistic command.
If I may, I think this is a good time to contrast with Malaysia, right? So Malaysia is proudly, well, we don't call ourselves an Islamic state per se, but our constitution clearly states that Islam is the religion of the federation. So that has created a lot of debate in the country as well. What does that even mean, right? To have Islam as an official religion, and yet we have a lot of non-Muslims, more than 40%. So I think this is where we're different from Indonesia, where we're trying to celebrate diversity, but yet still have Islam right smack in the middle of our identity as a nation. It goes back to your earlier question, does it work, does it not work? That is why Malaysia is doing a lot of soul searching right now, because I can't say that it's working well, because Dr. Ilham was talking about the dominance of the majority. So that is what is going on in Malaysia right now, whereby the minorities feel dominated. Some even feel like they're second-class citizens. So this is not a good reflection of Malaysia as a Muslim majority country. I'll just put it that way. So it's a good contrast, because if we talk about colonialism, Malaysia had this very hierarchical structure.
What's wrong? I don't understand what is wrong with majority rule, right? I'm not talking about, there's a difference between you preventing rights of minorities. That is something that I guess people agree is a wrong thing to do, that minorities should always have the right to practice and express themselves and so forth. But this idea that equality, or that justice means equality in the sense that everybody has to have the exact same. But if you have a majority of anything, I mean, think about it, you spoke about education, for example, right? Does everybody have to have the same results at the end of the class, right? Or if you're in a competition, does everyone have to come out winners? It doesn't make sense, right? So why is it that there is this idea or this kind of timidness of, you know, if there is a Christian majority country and it's ruled based on Christian ideology, or a Hindu majority country and is ruled based on Hindu ideology. What is wrong with that?
I
Why is there this shyness that Muslim majority countries shouldn't identify as Muslim nations? I'm not quite sure what the issue is. Okay, if you want to maybe chime in here and then we'll come back.
Maybe I
In
want to
India?
go back to the question on globalization, etc., that you have proposed. Ideally we have universal values that are coming from religious sources, from a variety of human understanding. The problem of the contemporary world is that modern capitalism divides the world in various ways, even while it tries to have a capitalist world, supposedly, a universal idea and so on and so forth. But just see the way in which borders and sovereignties act on people. I come from far south of Kerala, from the Malabar, south of India, from Kerala, from the Malabar coast. For me, Oman is nearer than New Delhi, actually. But Oman seems to be a very distant country now. We had such close interactions over millennia. This is true with northern India. Iran was our immediate neighbor until 1947. Iran seems to be a very distant country now because of the way in which our thinking is influenced by the Westphalian nation-state logic as such. And therefore, our thinking for a common humanity of ours have to confront these kinds of borders, these kinds of specific sovereignties that have, so that we can get a long-term kind of view of our own interaction and neighborliness and shared values and cultures. What happens is that we propose alternatives to that through civilizational logic, etc., which is important. That kind of questioning is very important. But sometimes civilization is also instrumentalized to project national goals and ambitions. It becomes a kind of fodder for contemporary assertions of nationalism. So civilization becomes national cultures in some manner. So there again is a bordering principle at work. And therefore, broader humanist ideas have to take cues from shared experiences of contributions of religions, contributions of intellectual traditions of various kinds, and Islam has contributed a whole lot for that. Contemporary globalization does not come from a variety of cultural experiences. People from different parts of Asia and Europe and Latin America and Africa contributing to it. No, it becomes much more a traditional one-way traffic that has happened with European colonialism and so on and so forth. So a global kind of idea has to emerge by incorporation of diverse ideas about common humanity of people. We cannot discuss globalization in that sense and its divisive kind of arenas without reference to contemporary capitalism, its neoliberal form, and so on and
I
so
think
forth.
the economic angle
Yes.
is an interesting one, and
Yeah.
I will come to it. I just want to take Dr. Qayyum's thoughts and a couple of feedback, and then I will tap into the economic side of things.
Yeah, and also when it comes to globalization, or also you have mentioned about this majorityness of the citizen and nation state. For example, like those vocabulary, like we always think about, is it really like our vocabulary, or is it the vocabulary is coined by the West? We are doing our best to publish our books in American University Press, or publish like an article like each index on something, and also we always care about the impact on our article. Like, And now there are some like discourse that now the West is declining and now is now becoming a multipolar like world, but gravity is still in the West. The gravity is still in America. And the way we like imagine our career is also is based on the Western mindset. And when I talk about Islam in China, or Islam in Japan, or Islam in Indonesia, or Islam in Malaysia, like most of the Muslim like thinkers, they regard those regions as like a marginal like exception. But while they are like quoting like a Muslim like thinker from the other region, like Middle East or like South Asia or the Ottoman Empire. But this is not the vocabulary that we have used before the modernization. Because when I did the fieldwork in Indonesia, and this the traditional madrasa called pesantren, and you can take the textbook which you use in the pesantren. The most of the books were written by called Nawawi Bantan, and the text is written in Arabic language, and where he was based in Haramain. So there is like a global network of this like Jawi like Muslims. That they have a strong connection with the Haramain and also the Malay archipelago. But they are not talking about the Indonesian Islam, or they are not talking about like globalization of the world. They are talking about Islam.
So this is my point here. It's a good kind of intersection here, which is you have spoken about borders, and borders that in the modern nation states. I think one thing that a lot of people agree on is that these borders have been imposed. They're not natural borders that exist. Sometimes in order to divide up power, sometimes for economic reasons, where certain resources start and end, is where they've been built. It was only maybe after these borders were formed that you started having cultural ideology associated with Islam, which stopped it from being a global religion and ideology to one that is curated for specific regions. So people started saying an Indonesian Islam, or a British Islam, or a South Asian, and so forth. Okay, how do you reverse that? It's not simply it's not enough for you to say, okay, I reject this ideology, I reject this terminology. How do you reverse 100 or 150 years of, look, when you look at from Saudi Arabia to Wahhabism to currently now, certain Muslim scholars and academicians being pushed and funded by governments in order to give a tailored Islamic identity to that country for political reasons. These aren't things that happened by chance. They happened purposefully. And it's not just Islam, by the way. Hinduism and other religions in countries around the world that were colonized were tailored in order for them to serve the powers that be. So now that you are saying, okay, at least the first point is to identify where the problem is. One of the problems was that these indigenous beliefs or ideologies were changed in order to fit the powers. Okay, what's the next step? How do you change that?
Yes, the next step is, to be honest, I don't have also the vision, because like this is a big homework for us. But I believe that there's nothing, I believe there's a limitation. We only have a limited influence as long as we like rely on, I don't know, like giving a lecture on the YouTube, or just like posting the video on Instagram, or just like organizing like an international like a conference. Like we need like a certain kind of rootedness, like both like rooted in our like the vocabulary in our civilization, and also rootedness in the local society, and also the rootedness in the history. For example, like I'm sure of it, like when I come to this conference and when I wear this clothes, I'm sure you imagine that this is so typical Japanese clothes. Right?
I was looking for the samurai swords.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot. The airport doesn't allow me, so I just let it go. So this image that this the Japanese clothes is like pure like Japanese culture. It means like Japanese have managed to preserve our own like a strong like a culture. But the answer is like yes and also like no. Like this is like Japanese clothes, but we call this clothes as kimono, and kimono means reverse, clothes, just clothes. We don't call this like a Japanese clothes. And also, can you see this like inner like a kimono, like inner clothes that wear inside of it? It is called like juban in Japanese, and it's come from Portuguese. It's called jiban, but this actually comes from Arabic word, juban. Can you guess which word? Juban. Juban.
Either cheese or cowardliness.
Oh no,
Or is it
it's Arabic word. Jubban.
Juba?
Jubba.
Oh,
So
I thought there was none.
yeah, so this is jubba. But the Japanese wear jubba as like an Indian clothes. And this shows the history that Japan also had a connection through the Portuguese like a merchant with the Andalus. We had also the connection with the Islamic civilization. And this, the fact that I wear this Japanese kimono is not showing our like national pride. Like I'm wearing this like a clothes to show how history is like complicated, and how our like ethnic identity is like complicated, and how the Asia like diverse, and how the rich connection that we had like before the modernization. And this is I can write an article on this, or like I can talk about like I don't know like how do you call it, like story in the YouTube, or I can do like Instagram, right? But this like visible like rootedness, like preserving this visible like rootedness, like wearing this like a kimono or wearing a batik, and also like and try and doing our best to like remember our this like a cultural like vocabulary, is I believe this is like a very important like one step.
First step, yes. Dr. Ilham?
Yes, okay, Brother Jamal, you mentioned a few key points I wanted to comment on. First of all, you mentioned what's wrong with majority rules. Yeah, I think we have to understand it in the context of after the colonies period has basically stopped. You mentioned as well the colonies formed countries. The motivation to form these countries when they freed themselves from colonialism was basically they are so mixed because of colonialism. Say the borders are not natural, or in the case of Malaysia, the people that lived there came in because they were coming from other colonies of the same power to work there, and they stayed there. And so the situation of the country was not an organic growth. Yeah. So if you want to develop that country to become a modern nation, you have to find an agreement at point zero. And you cannot say we do it by majority, and the minority will say, oh, then we don't participate, we just walk out, right? That would have happened in Indonesia. Indonesia was facing the threat that it was just split up in many countries, yeah? Because there was no agreement. So in the beginning, you have to agree on something that's acceptable for all. Yeah? So in that particular moment, no, you cannot have majority rules. You have to find something wise, yeah? That appeals to the wishes of the majority, at the same time it's acceptable to the minority. And I think what we see in the case of Indonesia, I cannot comment, and I don't want to comment on others, is particularly coming from that. Japan is a special case, I think, because Japan is very homogeneous, yeah? And it has never been a colony, and so it really grew in its borders as an island state, quite isolated for many years, as it is right now, and hence there was no major discussion of or there wasn't a major discussion, but not as extreme like in other countries. In Indonesia, it took years, decades to really understand how should we go forward. And we had discussions, very basic discussions, should Indonesia be an Islamic state or not? And people are still being suspected to ask for this. But now, after 80-something years, 81 years this year, this discussion is basically over, right? It has subsided, it's not there anymore. And we can basically get on and fill our one independence with a meaning. Yeah? You're independent, fine. What do you do with it? And now comes the question, which is actually as hard, not only find independence, but make it meaningful for our citizens. Yeah. So I think, go ahead.
Can I ask you, why do you want to reverse the authentic, personalized experience of becoming Muslims based on these political borders? Why do you want to reverse that?
Me personally?
Yeah.
I don't want to reverse it. I'm asking you.
Okay.
Personally, no, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
But I'll go with you, even though I'm the one who's meant to be doing the questions. But I think there is an idea. There is a feeling. I'll say from my own personal experience as somebody, a Muslim who was born and raised in
Western.
In a Western or European country. And who's growing up, identity politics was something, right? If I would go on holiday back home to where my parents came from in Egypt, I wasn't really Egyptian. Growing up in the UK, I wasn't really British viewed in that sense, right? So of course it was something that was significant, and obviously 9/11 and the war in Iraq, all of these things were very prominent kind of stops in my life. I think we as kind of what they call them third culture children, have a unique perspective on the world, in that because of the lack of full belonging to any specific culture, those of us who identify with an ideology, be it Islam, communism, whatever it may be, a non-geographical ideology, prefer to view the universality of that before we view borders. And it gives us a stronger sense of our understanding to ideology than one through it. And if I'm being strictly objective, assessing Islam as an ideology and a universal ideology, it was never sent to be Indonesian. It was never sent to be Malaysian or
Yes.
Indian or British or anything of that
Yes.
matter. And therefore, to try and identify it in that perspective, I think reduces its universal message.
Yes. So President Wahid, who is also an ulama, as an ulama, he said that Islam is an inspiration, not an aspiration. So when you talk about majority rules, it's actually Islam as a nice aspiration, a formal, legal, formal.
Oh, no, my issue
right.
here with the
But-
majority rule isn't from an Islamic perspective. It's actually from the modern perspective, is that you don't hear, for example, in the UK or in Germany or pick any country, where suddenly somebody will come and say, oh my God, how dare the majority rule? No one
okay.
says that,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah.
suddenly when it's a Muslim country, often, the question is, oh my God, why is there not minorities in government? There's a difference between minority representation
Yes.
and minority in governance. There is
Yeah.
a big difference here.
Yeah, yeah. So I will talk about Indonesia. In Indonesia, Nahdlatul Ulama around 5 years ago came out with the fatwa that in republics, kafir should not be used as a term
Okay.
to differentiate the
Believer and disbeliever.
in the governance and the governance of the nation. But this fatwa came because there were many movements from the Islamist agendas to formalize Islamic rules and regulations into bylaws. So Nahdlatul Ulama is the biggest Muslim organization, came out with that fatwa to remind the people of Indonesia that we are part of the Ukhuwah Wataniyah. So yes, Ukhuwah Wataniyah is an Islamic kind of principles, but define, as Muslims of Indonesia, we need to define what is Indonesian and what is an Indonesian Muslim is about. And that's what makes it different from the expression of the Muslims in Malaysia. Still the same, Ukhuwah Wataniyah, but it depends on how the Malaysian defines their Malaysianness or the Japanese and so
But
on
you
and
know
so
what's
forth.
ironic
so that's
is
why,
that the term itself, the terminology itself is an Arabic term.
yes, because,
Yeah,
because it is used for the Muslims in Indonesia.
No, I understand. But what I'm saying is, isn't within that an admission of an ideology that goes far beyond the Indonesian borders anyway? The fact that you're using that term shows that in itself, that principle isn't Indonesian.
Yeah,
Do you see what I'm saying?
yeah, like
Like Jubba.
Yeah.
you said, like he said.
So that means, so what I'm saying is, why are you limiting it? Why don't you actually fully embrace the idea of a universal ideology that goes beyond your borders and identify with that, not
Yeah,
identify it? Yes.
Of course, Islam as the fundamental values is still the same, but the expressions is different from different cultures and different countries. That of course is also influenced by the politics of these areas, right? But I get your point, but
If I may, for the Malaysian case, I mean, we're not where Indonesia is, we're still somewhere in the middle. I think what we fear when we talk about this global ideology of Islam, we're talking about globalization as well. So the fear is that an outside ideology, because you mentioned Wahhabism earlier, would seep into Malaysia and reduce the kind of indigenous Islam or what we are comfortable with. So there is that element as well, that if we, of course, Islam, as we're talking about, is a universal value, a religion, ideology, but in today's layered society that we have right now, we can't just say, oh, it's universal, everyone is treating everyone the same. No, it's not reality, right? Reality is there's still money coming from different countries trying to influence religiosity, Islamicity in Malaysia and other countries. So that is why I think there's a kind of pushback, or I guess attempts to kind of bring what is Islam to Malaysia. But to be honest, we're not there yet.
I promised I was going to bring back the economic part of the discussion, and I'm going to use this statement that you just made to bring it back. I will propose the following, and I would like to hear everybody's kind of response to it, that a lot of what moves power and politics for the past 100 years and even more has been money, right? And we are in this hyper-capitalist kind of phase of human history that is driven in the past, maybe let's say 30 odd years or 40 odd years, by neoliberal agendas that try to dress up the kind of fixation on wealth being in the hands of the few, with this idea that liberalism is a new moral compass that actually allows for everybody to do what they want, but actually they're usurping the majority for the benefit of the few. And on the other side, actually, Islam talks about the redistribution of wealth. It talks about that all humans are born equally. It talks about the need to elevate society through education, Iqra being the first revelation that came to the Prophet, and is against usury, is against interest, and is against everything that the capitalist kind of economics are built on. And as such, actually, the idea is to weaken the Islamic ideology as one that people and nations and societies can build around, either through making it something that is fearful, so ISIS and other ideologies being there, or through diluting it so that it is there as a cultural identity, not as a fixed one that you must adhere to in order to make your banking sector based on it, to make your educational sector based on it, and so forth. So I say this to ask you all here that if we are to agree that one of the main motivations of colonialism was to steal wealth of countries, of course there were other motivations as well in terms of expansionism, just human nature of wanting more and so forth, as well as other things. But if we agree that a large part of colonialism was an economic drive, and counter to that was religious ideology that was opposed to that, then how much of identity politics today is still driven by economics, and how much of it can be solved if you were to view Islam in your countries in a different way? Professor.
I think there is a dichotomy here. We tend to address the political economy question through cultural, intellectual kind of interventions, the value-based kind of discussion that we are having now. The analysis of contemporary inequities at the global level, the nature of capitalism that works at this point, the data-driven kind of economies, major corporations controlling large part of human wealth, and so on and so forth. Some of these kinds of things have to be addressed directly through shared understanding of a political economy analysis that is very significant, where our value-based discussions can contribute is to the whole point that you have raised on sharing of wealth, on the very question of justice that is very significant. if those values are not there, and the trouble with modern liberalism was its apology to capitalism to such extents that individual liberties and so on do not take care of the question of justice appropriately. And therefore, those elements of redistributive justice, of considering human beings, at par with each other, the question of dignity, and so on and so forth, they have to be, brought into this political economy analysis of ours of contemporary system. That becomes important. Otherwise, modern capitalism becomes cruel, and it marginalizes millions of people across the world. And we see the increase in poverty. We see the unevenness of the world economy in stark contrast. And therefore, somewhere that analysis has to be placed at the center of our discussions in a big manner, to which our own cultural, intellectual, value-based ideas can contribute, to which direction the global economy has to go.
So I'm not economist, so maybe I cannot directly answer to the question, but I can talk about the intellectual wealth, about the importance of keeping our intellectual wealth in the Muslim communities. So, now I also speak in English, and also I'm writing article in English as well. And also in Turkey, I'm also teaching a lecture in 40 languages for me. I'm not speaking Japanese. I speak English or Turkish, but. I've been in academia for the years, but what I have noticed is that still this Western education system, the Western university has the gravity. It means appealing to the Muslim students to go to the West and doing their master program or the PhD. While we don't, we are not. I'm sure there are lots of Muslim countries that are doing great work, but still we don't have that same gravity that appealing to not only the Muslim students but also non-Muslim students or outside of the Muslim country to come to invite to our region to study their own region, which means that there was a friend who's studying the PhD in America, and at that time I was also a PhD, and I was studying about Ottoman tasawwuf, the Ottoman Sufi culture, and one friend about me that when you come to America, because America has a better education system, and I said to him, does it mean that I should study Ottoman tasawwuf in America? And he said, no, that you should study Japanese literature in America, and get a PhD in America. It will give you the high credit. So I'm sure this was sincere advice. It's sincere advice that he believes that American education is better than Japanese education. But here, what he described is that my value can be reduced to this narrow Japanese-ness, that I don't have a power to study about Islam or study about outside of Japan, but I should go to outside of Japan to study myself. And while when you look at the history of Islamic civilization, have you ever heard the word the Khatib Chalabi, the thinker? In Europe, he's known as Hajj Khalifa. He's the author who authored the Jihannuma, the World Atlas, and he wrote about the history of the old region, and there was a chapter about Japan. And Khatib Chalabi himself, he didn't travel to Japan. He just collected in a manuscript written in Europe, but the way he analyzed the political system in Japan, the medieval Japan, the way he understands the social structure of Japan, the way he understands the Japanese religion is so high level that it was so accurate. And that was the gravity that Islamic civilization had. Yes, Islamic civilization is based on Islam, but the Muslim thinker is not just studying about the Islam. They are also engaged in the sciences. And also, even himself, he never traveled to Japan, that he has this intellectual ability so that he can understand the Japanese society. Then we have to think about ourselves. Are we allowing, for example, non-Muslim students to study? For example, are we inviting Japanese students to this region and let them study like Japanese literature and offer like better like education systems? Or like are we like appealing to like Chinese students to come here and study like Chinese literature? Or do we offer like enough like intellectual like infrastructure? So it's not about just like the like number of it's not about just like how we manage the election. It's not about how we manage the economy. It's not just how we monitor the market. Like what matters is that revive this like a gravity. Like I personally call this like a civilization like a gravity. And as long as like, we don't have this gravity with it, then everything like remain in the really like superficial like discursive level.
Okay, I think just to add on, the question of Islam and economics is, I think, very important. If you look very back from the beginning of Islam, our Prophet, peace be upon him, was an entrepreneur. He was a trader. He was a businessman, right? So it is very related to the origin of our religion, basically. Yeah. If you look at it in Indonesia, in the years, the foundation years, let's say the first 10 to 20 years, the economy was very bad. Yeah? People tried to do redefinition of the state. In the end, we ended up with a system was quasi-authoritarian, and then was taken over and going to the left, basically, very much, and then was taken over by the next president. He basically managed to develop the economy, but relying only on a certain group of people, right? So that becomes so concentrated that after 32 years of rule, that was again appended, and now we are where we are. We are in a so-called reformed era, where we can see, I mean, whatever happened to the state and to the people before, now we have given them liberties, economically, socially, politically. And what has happened? The government is not pronounced as an Islamic government, but the society is very much Islamized, yeah? But in an organic way. And even non-Muslims become embedded and integrated in what I call the Indonesian Islamic civilization. They use the same term, they behave the same, and it's a very natural, good flow. Yeah? What I see with my friends that are non-Muslims, it's very natural, right? We respect one another. I think that's how it should be. And economically, we're not there yet. It's still concentrated in with few people. I think there are studies that show that an enormous percentage of the Indonesian's wealth is only in the hand of few. And that's absolutely not Islamic, right? We don't want it. On many shoulders, the wealth should be distributed, etc. Cannot be perfectly distributed, but as much as possible. And I think the countries that manage that, yeah, if you look at, there's something which I came across called an Islamic country index, yeah. And the surprising thing is that the first 40 countries, you don't have a majority of Muslims in these countries, but they have managed, and the criteria, economics, human and political rights, governance, and also international relations, the four. Yeah? And if you rank it, the best so-called Islamic country comes in number 41.
Islamic.
Yeah? And Indonesia is not that country. It's another country here present in this round. Guess which one? That would be Malaysia.
Yes.
Yeah? But it's way below other countries that are not claiming that at all, because they can deliver this fairness, right? And these are Islamic principles. They are universal. And you can come up with these principles even you have a minority of Muslims. It's something human, something universal, right? And if you develop that, then you can deliver for the people. So economics is very important, as we know. Yeah? If people cannot live, they don't find a livelihood, then they will do something about it. Yeah.
Can I just add to that? Because I don't think it's about liberal economy versus Islamic economy in terms of state economic ideology. It's more on the liberal system itself, because in Indonesia the Islamic Sharia economy is growing, but it's driven by the people, not by the adoption of Sharia economy as the ideological economy of the state.
All right. I know you all say economics is important, but time is even more important. Time is money, they say.
Time is economy.
So I will
time
wrap
is money.
up here.
Time is money.
I will wrap up here, and I would like to thank you, Dr. Ilham Habibi, Alisa Wahid, Dr. Naoki Yamamoto, Professor Ramakrishnan, and Dr. Saizia Shukri. Thank you very much for joining us on Center Stage.